There's a button there to turn it on and off.
Quorum being present, the Subcommittee on Health, Employment, Labor, and Pensions will come to order. Good morning and welcome to today's subcommittee hearing. I'd like to thank our panel of witnesses and our members as we examine ways to simplify and modernize retirement plan. I don't think anybody here is concerned about retirement right now, right? Good. It's good to see that. But we want to make sure we do the right thing for the future and make sure that people have the opportunities. We want to make it easier and more affordable for employers and businesses to offer retirement plans to their employees. In 1974, the year I got married, what a great year. Congress enacted the Employee Retirement and Income Security Act, or ERISA, which governs and sets minimum standards for employee benefit plans. This landmark law has helped millions of Americans to save for retirement and to retire from work with financial stability and peace of mind. To date, there are nearly 700,000 private pension plans covering almost 135 million participants, with approximately 92.5 million American workers actively participating in and contributing to their plans. Private retirement and pension plans are an important benefit that employers can offer to recruit and retain employees for good-paying jobs and help workers successfully save for retirement. But the regulations that govern retirement plan administration are beginning to show their age. Many ERISA provisions related to retirement plan administration are in desperate need of updating, with some having last been revised over 2 decades ago. Red tape and unnecessary federal restrictions stand in the way of lower costs for small businesses and have contributed to a compliance uncertainty, making it harder for employers to provide their employees with retirement savings programs. These are not the most encouraging things to hear, as more Americans are retiring, and studies show Americans should be saving more for retirement, not less. According to the U.S. Census Bureau, more than 20% of U.S. residents are projected to reach age 65 or older by 2030. As an entire generation moves closer to the cusp of retirement, and as the retirement needs of all workers continue to change, employers must be equipped with up-to-date rules and guidance that make it easier to offer their employees retirement plans, not more difficult. At today's hearing, we'll examine 4 bipartisan proposals to address the need to update the administration of the nation's retirement plans. H.R. 4604, the Increasing Access to a Secure Retirement Act of 2017, H.R. 4158, the Retirement Plan Modernization Act, H.R. 854, the Retirement Security for American Workers Act, and H.R. 4610, the Receiving Electronic Statements to Improve Retirees' Earnings Act. The first proposal we will examine today, H.R. 4604, will reduce the compliance uncertainty that companies face by amending ERISA to clarify existing rules that provide a fiduciary safe harbor when selecting an annuity provider. The second, H.R. 4158, will increase the automatic cash-out limit for retirement plans from $5,000 to $7,600 and defray some of the cost of retirement plan administration for small employers. The third piece of legislation we'll look at is H.R. 854, will eliminate two burdensome requirements affecting multiple employer plans. The common nexus requirement that prevents adoption of open multi-employer plans, MEPs, in which unrelated employers may collectively satisfy plan administration requirements, and the one bad apple rule that punishes all employers in a plan for the failure of one employer to meet the plan's requirements. The final bill, H.R. 4610, authorizes the electronic disclosure of retirement plan information so that plan participants may access their plan information online. These are just a few of the bipartisan solutions our members are working on to simplify and modernize retirement plan administration and benefit both employees and businesses, large and small. I look forward to hearing from our panel of witnesses and from other members of the subcommittee today as we explore these proposals to make it easier for employers to give their employees the tools they need to save for retirement. I now yield to Ranking Member Sablan for his opening remarks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Walberg, I appreciate you convening today's hearing. Good morning, everyone. Subcommittee Democrats and I are committed to responsible solutions that strengthen our country's retirement system so that after a lifetime of hard work, Americans can retire with security and dignity. Today's hearing focuses on 4 bipartisan bills, 3 of which are from members of this committee. My Democratic colleagues and I welcome the opportunity to work with our colleagues across the aisle on these issues. Today is an opportunity for members to learn and ask constructive questions with the expectation that the bills will be marked up by the committee without delay. Let me briefly discuss each one. H.R. 854, the Retirement Security for American Workers Act, is co-authored by Representatives Vern Buchanan of Florida and Richie Neal of Massachusetts. The bill addresses multiple employer plans, or MEPs as they are known. A MEP is a single retirement plan for employees who work for different employers in the same industry. It allows businesses to share administrative costs and responsibilities while pooling employee contributions. They are different from multi-employer pensions, which are collectively bargained and a source of present concern. H.R. 854 seeks to address barriers to the expansion of MEPs. H.R. 4158, the Retirement Plan Modernization Act, introduced by our Chairman Walberg and myself, makes a common sense and long overdue update to the safe harbor threshold by which employers could transfer the account of a former employee to an IRA. Our bill increases the limit from $5,000 to $7,600 and indexes it for inflation. The third bill is H.R. 4610, the Receiving Electronic Statements to Improve Retiree Earnings Act, or the Retire Act. Congressman Polis has long championed this particular bill, and Dr. Rowe has partnered with him on it. I am one of the bill's 39 co-sponsors. The legislation allows retirement plans to automatically enroll participants into the electronic delivery of plan documents. Participants will still be provided an annual paper notice and have an opportunity to continue to receive paper copies. Some questions have been raised about whether the Retire Act's consumer protections are sufficient, and I look forward to hearing the witnesses' views on that as well as any of the other bills we're considering today. And the final bill is H.R. 4604, the Increasing Access to a Secure Retirement Act, co-authored by Chairman Walberg and Congresswoman Blonde Rochester. This bill seeks to increase workers' access to lifetime income options or annuities in their retirement plan. The retirement savings landscape has changed significantly over the past decades, and with the dearth of traditional defined benefit pension plans, there is interest in offering workers access to annuities as part of their retirement planning strategy. Department of Labor's safe harbor regulations have not resulted in the anticipated expansion of annuity offerings. H.R. 4604 seeks to do that and clarify existing safe harbor. Before concluding, I would like to yield my final minute to the gentlelady from Delaware, Congresswoman Blonde Rochester.
I would like to thank Ranking Member Sablon for yielding and also thank Chairman Walberg for having this hearing. Today's hearing will showcase a number of bipartisan solutions that members have come up with to help Americans and their families save for retirement. With our changing economy, it is essential that we find new and innovative ways to allow families to save for their retirement. I am proud to have worked on H.R. 4604, the Increasing Access to a Secure Retirement Act of 2017, with my subcommittee chairman, Mr. Walberg. This bipartisan piece of legislation would clarify existing rules to allow retirement plan sponsors to provide annuities, which are lifetime income products, as part of a menu of options that employers can offer their employees. I look forward to the witnesses' testimony and the important dialogue we will have about these bills. I want to thank the ranking member for yielding me time, and with that, I yield back.
Thank you very much, Congresswoman Rochester, and thank you, Congressman Sablon. Pursuant to Committee Rule 7C, all members will be permitted to submit written statements to be included in the permanent record hearing, and without objection, the hearing record will remain open for 14 days to allow such statements and other extraneous material referenced during the hearing to be submitted for the official hearing record. It's now my pleasure to introduce our distinguished witnesses. We have Mr. Tim Walsh as a Senior Managing Director of Institutional Investment Solutions Distribution for TIAA in Waltham, Massachusetts. Ms. Krista DeLoya is Vice President and Associate General Counsel with Fidelity Investments in Boston, Massachusetts, and is testifying on behalf of the American Benefits Council. Mr. J. Mark Ivory is the non-resident senior fellow at the Brookings Institution here in Washington, D.C., and Mr. Paul Schott-Stevens is President and CEO of the Investment Company Institute here in Washington. I now ask each witness to raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Let the record reflect the witnesses answered in the affirmative. Before I recognize you to provide your testimony, let me briefly explain our lighting system. You will each have 5 minutes to present your testimony. When you begin, the light in front of you will turn green. When 1 minute is left, the light will turn yellow. When your time has expired, the light will turn red. At that point, I will ask that you wrap up your remarks as best as you are able. Members will have each 5 minutes to ask questions. We now proceed to Mr. Walsh.
Good morning. Chairman Walberg, Ranking Member Sablon, Chairwoman Fox, distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for inviting me here today. My name is Tim Walsh. I am a Senior Managing Director at TIAA. I am grateful for this opportunity to share TIAA's views on policy changes that can improve retirement security for all Americans. For 100 years, TIAA's mission has been to provide retirement and financial solutions to the institutions and clients we serve, primarily in the not-for-profit segment. Today, TIAA manages $1 trillion in assets for 5 million individuals across 15,000 institutions. As baby boomer retirements accelerate and life expectancies continue to rise, it's become increasingly important that we ensure individuals not only save for retirement, but have easy access to products that provide a guaranteed income throughout retirement. Annuities are the only private market solution that offer guaranteed returns and guaranteed income, and therefore provide retirees with exceptional protection from outliving their savings. For the last century, ensuring our clients have guaranteed income in retirement has been TIA's core focus. We are proud that the overwhelming majority of our clients have access to annuity products through their employer-sponsored retirement plan. This is in stark contrast to individuals working in the 401k space, where only 5% of 401k plans offer participants access to an annuity. As a result, when many 401k participants retire, they often do not have direct access to products that can make their savings last for the rest of their lives. Instead, they often need to shop for annuity products in the retail market, which is generally far less competitive than in-plan, institutionally priced products that can leverage economies of scale. We are pleased the committee is addressing this important issue. My written testimony outlines a number of policy changes we believe would help Americans achieve a secure retirement. I would like to thank Chairman Rayburn and Congresswoman Blunt Rochester for introducing H.R. 5604, the Increasing Access to a Secure Retirement Act. This bill would amend an existing regulatory safe harbor intended to encourage inclusion of annuity products on employer-sponsored retirement plan investment menus. The changes proposed in this bill are critical and overdue. A main area of concern we hear from employers every day wanting to offer annuity products on their retirement plan menus is how can they adequately satisfy their legal responsibilities when selecting an insurance company to provide an annuity product. Many employers are reluctant to use the current safe harbor because of a lack of specificity surrounding the evaluation of the financial strength of the insurer offering the annuity. Your bill addresses these concerns by allowing employers to rely on state regulators, the appropriate authority in evaluating an insurer's strength. While the decision to adopt in-plan annuity products would still remain with the employer, we strongly believe the bill will provide employers with the guidance they desire. Ultimately, this will lead to more Americans having access to institutionally priced, in-plan annuity options that provide guaranteed returns and the option to choose a guaranteed stream of retirement income they will not outlive. TIA is a strong supporter of your bill, and I am honored to be here today to discuss the important role it will play in better integrating guaranteed income solutions into the current retirement system. In addition to our support for your bill, TIA supports the other proposals being discussed today. But I'd like to briefly highlight one of those proposals, electronic delivery. Simply put, the RETIRE Act, introduced by Congressman Rowe and Polis, would modernize current regulations and allow more individuals to receive retirement plan documents through electronic delivery. TIAA is a leading advocate for this bill, and we strongly believe its enactment would be another significant step in bringing today's retirement system into the 21st century. Finally, I would note many of the policies we discussed today are included in the Retirement Enhancement and Savings Act, known as RESA. This bipartisan, bicameral bill, which consolidates a number of smart proposals into one piece of legislation, would significantly modernize the retirement system. Thank you for the opportunity to testify and for your consideration. At the end, I welcome any questions.
And thank you, Mr. Walsh. And Ms. DeLoya, I'm really grateful to have you here. My late father participated in Fidelity Investments, and he always spoke of your incredible integrity. Please proceed.
Chairman Rayburn, Ranking Member Sablan, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today. My name is Krista DeLoya, and I'm here on behalf of the American Benefits Council. The Council's members either sponsor directly or provide services to retirement and health plans covering more than 100 million Americans. I am a Vice President and Associate General Counsel at Fidelity Investments, supporting its retirement business for over 20 years. Fidelity has the privilege of serving over 18 million Americans from over 22,000 employers. Both the Council and Fidelity take the responsibility to help individuals achieve retirement security through private savings system very seriously. Collectively, we have a solid understanding of what is working well and where change is needed. The following proposals are significant steps to improve the system. First, updating the cash-out limit will increase efficiency in plan administration, lower costs, as well as reducing the potential for individuals losing track of their benefits. Next, allowing electronic delivery as the default distribution method for plan disclosures would improve employees' engagement, provide enormous flexibility, and cost savings. Finally, expanding access to multiple employer plans will make sponsoring a plan more attractive to small businesses and contingent workers. ABC and Fidelity support each of these proposals that will enhance the retirement savings of American workers. First, the cash-out rules. The current cash-out rules reflect an important balance put in place when ERISA was enacted. On one hand, we want employees to be able to keep their balances in the plan until retirement. On the other, the cost of maintaining these accounts over many years is often borne by the plan. The cash-out rule facilitates the likelihood that an individual will consolidate their retirement savings, and it minimizes the costs related to maintaining these accounts. This is critical as individuals hold multiple jobs throughout their lifetime. Often companies merge, change names, and it becomes more difficult for workers to track down their prior employers and the plan benefits that they left behind. The cash-out provisions include protections for employees. While it's often referred to as an automatic distribution, this does not actually occur until the participant receives notice that they have the opportunity to roll over the distribution to another qualified plan or to an IRA. In addition, amounts over $1,000 must be directly rolled to an IRA, which allows for the avoidance of taxable income, the avoidance of withholding and potential penalties, and allows for the continued tax-deferred savings. Here's how it works. A recent college graduate begins employment. They are auto-enrolled into their 401k plan. As often is the case, they are recruited by another firm and they decide to leave to go to the new firm. They have a balance of $4,500. The plan is permitted to send them a distribution. However, before doing so, they must send them a notice. In this instance, the participant decides to roll over their prior balance from that former employer's plan into their new plan. This allows them to consolidate their retirement benefits and continue to save. Please keep in mind that this provision is optional. Employers do not have to include a cash-out provision, nor do they have to use the highest limit, but it allows plan sponsors to determine what works best for their plan and their employees. For employers with high volume of turnover, the cost of maintaining contact with lost participants and record-keeping these balances is often borne by the entire plan. We view increasing the current $5,000 limit to $7,600 and building an inflation to index going forward as good government. The cash-out threshold is one of the few dollar figures applicable to retirement plans that is not currently indexed for inflation. By doing so, it would remove the necessity for Congress to have to revisit every 10 to 20 years. Secondly, on electronic communications empower participants to take action. However, the current rules governing electronic media were issued over 15 years ago and are highly restrict its use. Paperless communications should be encouraged as it provides more opportunity for individuals to take action immediately. The Retire Act would allow e-delivery as the default method for sending plan communications, but at the same time would preserve the choice for those participants who still want paper. It is a positive step to modernizing the electronic delivery rules. And finally, just a few words on open MEPs. Many Americans simply do not have access to retirement plans through their workplace. This is pervasive in the small business community, where costs can be prohibitive. Multiple employer plans can address this problem, allowing small employers to join together and get economies of scale, therefore dramatically reducing costs. On behalf of ABC and its members and the millions of Americans whose benefits depend on the retirement private system, we thank you for holding this hearing. I appreciate this opportunity to testify, and the Council looks forward to working with the subcommittee and all the members of the Education and the Workplace Committee to advance these proposals. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Avery, we now recognize you for your 5 minutes. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Sablon, distinguished members of the subcommittee. Pensions and savings, as you know, have traditionally been the subject of bipartisan cooperation. And it's heartening to see this committee continue that tradition with your current efforts. With respect to the remarks, Mr. Chairman, that you made regarding the open MEP bill, I couldn't agree more. I think you pinpointed the two real obstacles, the common bond requirement that the Labor Department has interpreted from the ERISA statute that has limited the ability of small businesses to get together into a single plan with a professional administrator, excuse me, if they don't already have a common group or interest apart from benefits, and the one bad apple rule that you mentioned, which I had hoped when I was at Treasury we might be able to eliminate administratively. Unfortunately, we couldn't get there. I'd like to think that maybe the current Treasury Department could finally achieve that, but I'm delighted that the RISA legislation and your proposed legislation include the open MEP proposal. Second, I'd like to also associate myself with your remarks and those of Mr. Walsh, TIA, regarding the annuity safe harbor. I've been an advocate for at least a dozen years of having this kind of simplification for plan sponsors that particularly have 401k or defined contribution plans and have been too reluctant for years to include an annuity. We need more lifetime income in our system. We need more options for people to know how to decumulate, how to handle the savings they've accumulated once they retire, and to have a lifetime guaranteed way to manage those assets and protect themselves from the risk of outliving their savings. This would put annuities in a much more realistic, favorable position vis-a-vis the employer plan universe by making it easier for employers to decide to offer an annuity in their plan, with all the advantages to employees that having an employer plan with fiduciary responsibilities, with group purchasing, economies of scale, et cetera, as the context for providing the annuity. So I think that is another bill that is excellent, included in the RISA legislation that the Senate has worked up over time and that the House is now considering, and much of which the House has worked up as well in the bills we've just referred to. So I'm optimistic that we'll get RISA passed, that you folks will get that job done in the near future, and want to commend Ms. Blunt-Rochester for her leadership, as well as yours, Mr. Chairman, on this. I think when it comes to the electronic communication proposals, HR 4610, we have to recognize that there's a great deal of merit to electronic communications and that there are all sorts of advantages that e-delivery can provide. Nesting of messages, starting simpler, letting people drill down to more information, many different ways that they can encourage savings and make the system simpler. The question, I think, is whether we have found the consumer protections that we need in order to make that legislation ready for markup. I don't think we're there yet. I think this is a great opportunity, though, for the retirement community to get together and to work out a set of consumer protections that are not too burdensome, no more than necessary, but also no less than necessary, and that we can work together on a bipartisan basis and in a very consensual spirit to get there and to move electronic communications forward. Finally, with respect to the cash-out limit, I think that that also presents an opportunity to look more broadly and to consider legislation that would do more, as Ms. Bonamici's bill and Mr. Neal's bill do, to promote portability in other ways, including the investments in the rollover IRAs. Delighted to discuss these and answer your questions.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Mr. Stevens, now recognize you for your 5 minutes of testimony.
Thank you, Chairman Wahlberg, Ranking Member Sablon, members of the subcommittee, for this opportunity to discuss two important bipartisan proposals to make America's retirement system even stronger. They are H.R. 854, the Retirement Security for American Workers Act, which provides a common-sense solution to improving retirement plan coverage among small employers by allowing formation of open multiple employer plans, or open MEPs, and H.R. 4610, the Receiving Electronic Statements to Improve Retiree Earnings Act, which will aid plan participants and reduce costs by making e-delivery the default for ERISA communications. Each of these bills provides a targeted solution to a discrete issue, building upon the strengths of the voluntary private sector retirement system that is already meeting the needs of millions of American workers. To put these measures in context, let me just take a moment to talk about those strengths. Thanks in part to Congress's efforts over time to promote retirement savings, Americans currently have $28.2 trillion earmarked for retirement. That's a record level, and it's 7 times more per household after inflation than we held in 1975. Those assets are widely held. Nearly over 80% of near-retiree households have accumulated retirement resources, either in pension benefits or defined contribution or IRA assets. After 4 decades of innovation and improvements, more retirees receive more private sector pension income today than was the case in 1975. Recent research by ICI and researchers at the Internal Revenue Service show the median worker is able to replace 103% of their spendable income in retirement after claiming Social Security. Now, one concern of today's hearing is the coverage gap. It's often misunderstood and is not as large as some may think. Our research indicates that among the workers most likely to save for retirement, 77 participated in an employer plan, either directly or through a spouse, in 2014. But to be sure, efforts are needed to make retirement plans more workable for small employers. Just 55% of workers at small firms, those are firms with fewer than 100 employees, are covered by a plan, as compared to 85% of workers at large firms. Small employers cite administrative costs and burdens as a significant reason why they don't offer this benefit. H.R. 854 addresses these concerns directly. It would allow unrelated small employers to band together to form a multiple employer plan, known as an open MEP or pooled plan. The bill includes important safeguards to ensure that the sponsor of an open MEP meets all its legal duties, including adherence to the essential ERISA fiduciary standards. H.R. 854 would eliminate the barriers to MEPs in both Labor Department guidance and in IRS rules. It would ensure that employers do not need a pre-existing business or industry connection to join together to sponsor a MEP, and would eliminate the tax code's one bad apple rule, which currently could jeopardize an entire multiple employer plan if just one employer fails to meet qualification requirements. ICI supports the open MEP concept because it would reduce administrative and compliance costs and thus remove barriers for small employers that want to offer plans. ICI also strongly supports H.R. 4610. This bill would allow sponsors to make e-delivery the default method for communicating with participants while maintaining the option for participants to select paper delivery. New research sponsored by ICI and the American Retirement Association, published just recently, shows that 93% of households with defined contribution plans have access to the internet. Interestingly, in 2016, 88% of those households engaged in online banking transactions, seemingly a much more sensitive online activity than merely the receipt of electronic disclosures. E-delivery could significantly enhance communications with participants in their understanding and use of their plans. Assistive and translation technologies on the internet will make disclosures far more useful to workers with disabilities or limited English skills. It'll open access to more detailed information and calculators as well as other tools that'll help participants manage their accounts, all while reducing plan costs. And importantly, H.R. 4610, in our view at least, provides robust safeguards for participants who want to receive paper. In our written statement, the Institute lays out other steps that policymakers should consider to enhance retirement security. And I want to close by just mentioning what we think is the most important of all, and that is ensuring the soundness of the Social Security system and its sound footing for the indefinite future, to preserve that program as a universal, employment-based, progressive foundation for retirement security for all working Americans. Thank you for your attention. I look forward to your questions.
And thank you. Thank you to each of the witnesses today. Appreciate your attention to time frame, too. Having read a number of your contracts over the years, I wouldn't have expected it to be so close. So thank you. Thank you very much. I now turn to questioning from our panel and turn to the chairwoman of our full committee of Education Workforce, Dr. Fox.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I want to echo your thanks to the panel members today for their very, very excellent presentations and for staying so close to on time. That is very helpful. Mr. Stevens, H.R. 854 would allow unrelated employers to participate in a multiple employer plan. What safeguards does this bill propose to ensure adherence to ERISA fiduciary standards in these open multiple employer plans?
Thank you for your question, Chairman Fox. It's a delight to see you here at this hearing. The employer will retain its fiduciary responsibilities with respect to the selection and the oversight on an ongoing basis of the MEP provider. Other fiduciary duties will be assumed by that MEP provider or by service providers that have delegated functions. The structure, in other words, preserves the important protections that ERISA has with respect to fiduciary obligations, but allocates them in different ways than would be the case today in order to facilitate the structure of pooling, if you will, different employers participating in a single plan.
Thank you very much. And by the way, I want to say the comments you all have made, I think, are very encouraging. We have been talking a lot about the need for Americans to save more, and I believe the message is getting through, and that's encouraging to hear. Ms. DeLoya, how would establishing electronic delivery as a default for disclosure of retirement plan documents improve access to information for both plan sponsors and participants? And again, it's encouraging to hear how many people use the internet these days who have retirement plans. Would access to participant email addresses help plan sponsors connect with missing or unresponsive participants? And Mr. Walsh and Mr. Stevens, you are welcome to add to anything Ms. DeLoya says.
So thank you. We communicate more and more with both our plan sponsors and our plan participants via electronic means. It's become the way we do business. Through our plan sponsors, we can get direction, we can give them documents, we can get reports, we can share information efficiently. With participants, the same thing is occurring, is that participants who engage with us online are more involved, they have higher participation rates, they have higher contribution rates, they have higher balances. And the benefit to electronic communications is, as Mr. Erie indicated, is you can have the layering of communications. To the extent a participant wants to learn more, they can click, they can take action right away versus getting a paper communication and then putting it in a pile and saying, I'll get to it later. Your second question regarding the use of email addresses to find lost participants would be extremely beneficial. As I think folks are aware, there's a considerable problem increasing of lost participants, participants who plan sponsors can't find that have a benefit in a plan. And being able to have one more piece of information about them, an email address, would increase the probability that they could be found and be connected with their benefit.
Thank you.
So I'll add to that, Dr. Fox. Yes, yes, and yes. Fully agree.
Thank you. That's a great way to respond.
I will subscribe to Mr. Walsh's answer.
Thank you. Well, Mr. Walsh, DOL's, you all have alluded to this in your comments, but DOL's Employee Benefit Security Administration issued guidance in 2008 and again 2015, attempting to provide plan sponsors with a safe harbor, but for satisfying fiduciary duties in the selection of an annuity provider. Despite this guidance, uncertainty remains. Chairman Wahlberg's H.R. 4604 offers a workable solution to this lack of clarity. Can you describe what risk plan sponsors are exposed to when the standards they are held to are unclear, and how do these risks negatively impact plan participants?
So, and thank you for that question. The risk is they won't use them. Simply stated that, if you think about the original intent of the safe harbor, it was spot on. It's what we wanted to do, but unfortunately, it's been unworkable. When you talk to plan sponsors, when you talk to the consultants they work with, they just think it's unworkable. So the risk is then plan sponsors, as fiduciaries, won't use these lifetime income solutions. And again, in turn, what that means to participants is increased risk. Think about, we all talk about market risk in our business, right? I would suggest the biggest risk is longevity risk. Right? Married, coupled, age 65. Depending on whose math you believe, there's about a 50% chance probability one of them lives to 92, right? So the risk is they won't use these products.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you. And I recognize my friend from the Northern Marianas, Ranking Member Sablan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and welcome, Ms. Deloya. Thank you for being here today and for the American Benefits Council support of the bill that I introduced with Chairman Wahlberg. I have been told that there is no conflict because you're here as a member of an association, not as a representative of Fidelity. My wife has accounts with you, and I'm very happy, actually. Yeah, so there's no conflict of interest. But I want to ask you to elaborate on two things, if I may. First, could you please talk about how this bill is advantageous for those workers who move from job to job? And additionally, would you please talk about how a safe harbor IRA is prudently invested and why that makes sense for the retirement plan participant?
So the cash out provision allows the participant and prompts the participant to actually take a distribution and consolidate it with their other retirement benefits. And the increase, as you know and as are articulated, is just would make it in line with the other indexes, the other amounts that are in governed retirement plans. And it will allow them to either take the balance and put it in their retirement plan, that of their new employer, or put it in an IRA. As far as the IRAs that I think you're referring to where the participant doesn't respond, currently under the Department of Labor rules, those amounts have to be invested in something conservative, akin to a money market. And the idea is that there would be preservation of capital while the participant responds to and takes control over their individual IRA.
All right. I actually met someone yesterday, and they were telling me that they search for individuals in over time in the millions actually, and they have been rather successful in doing that and getting the individuals to know that their money could be parked somewhere where it is invested. And anybody else has anything more to add? Mr. Avery? I got that right, Avery?
Yes, Mr. Sablan, thank you. I agree that, excuse me, the investing of these automatic rollovers into IRAs could be improved. And Ms. Bonamici has co-sponsored a bill, as you know, with, I believe, Mr. Messer, Mr. Neal, to do that. The investment in a just principal protection has led to a dwindling of the balances in these accounts, as the GAO reported several years ago. So taking away the choice from the employee to keep the money in the plan, if his or her benefit is more than $5,000 and less than $7,600 indexed for inflation, if that choice is going to be taken away, I think that the committee ought to consider that very carefully and consider whether there needs to be more portability, better investments, permit target date funds or life cycle funds, as this lost and found bill would do, as part of the investment, permit or provide for the complete cash outs, $1,000 or less, which are not automatically rolled over to an IRA. Perhaps those ought to be invested in some safe investment. There, the amount is so small that target date might not be appropriate. And can we do more in connection, use this work on the cash out limit as an opportunity to do more to promote portability more broadly? Let people consolidate their assets. There's nothing now in the system that really nudges them to do that or helps them to do that. They can have multiple IRAs and plans. So we can do better for people with a pension registry or a sort of common information base.
All right, I'm running out of time, but Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent to insert into the record a letter addressed to both of us, you and I, from the Retirement Clearinghouse.
Without objection and hearing none, it will be submitted.
Thank you.
Thank the gentleman, and recognize myself for 5 minutes of questioning. Mr. Walsh, as you indicated, the increasing access to Secure Retirement Act, or Safe Harbor, sometimes wonder how we put these titles together. But,
Me too.
It's tradition. Which Representative Blunt Rochester and I introduced this past December, would make it easier for retirement plan sponsors to provide annuities as part of an employee benefits plan. Can you describe for us why access to lifetime income options is so important to retirement security, and secondarily, how does offering an in-plan product reduce costs for plan participants?
So, Chairman Wahlberg, we look at this as a natural evolution. So why do this? So, 3 main reasons: risk, more money. Can I say that? More money.
Okay, around here.
And I would say increased flexibility. So, annuities and flexibility, sometimes those 2 words don't mix, but let me address that. So, first of all, risk. This is about reducing risk. Again, I mentioned we all talk about market risk. I talked about longevity risk. But point-in-time risk, inflation risk, interest rate risk, but also cognitive risk, right? Think about what happens to older Americans as they age, cognitive decline. So the ability to lock in that benefit, lock in that guaranteed income is really important. So reduce risk. Number 1 is more money. So think about the industry standard for systematic withdrawal used to be 4%. But if you talk to the economists and mathematicians now, they say, well, maybe it's 3.5%. Whereas because we're pooling risk, the payouts from annuities are typically 6.5%, 7%. So actually more money. And I say increased flexibility because if you combine partial annuitization, and let me stress that, we typically do not recommend full annuitization. We recommend partial annuitization in combination with systematic withdrawal. What that does is, it maximizes your guaranteed income to pay for core living expenses. There's more money for fun expenses, travel, entertainment, but maybe more importantly, money for healthcare expenses, right? That's probably the unknown, healthcare expenses. And then the one that surprises people is actually maximize dollars for legacy, actually the ability to leave that money behind. Because simply stated, once you have that guaranteed income, with the remainder of your portfolio, technically, you can take on some more risk to actually grow that balance. So those would be the three main reasons. As far as cost, it's pretty simple. I mean, it's funny, if you look at where annuity purchases come from, most annuity purchases come from people pulling money out of qualified plans and then going out to the retail market and buying an annuity. According to Morningstar, the average cost of retail annuity is 230 basis points, 2.3%. Whereas in plan, and I can only speak for TIA, our average cost is somewhere around 50 basis points, 1/4 of the cost. So that's what we meant by economies of scale.
Thank you. Ms. Deloya, thank you for being here. Your comments on Ranking Member Sablan's and my retirement plan were helpful. This bill proposes a narrow but critical reform that will have a positive impact on retirement savers. You note that the proposal would reduce the costs of plan administration. Can you describe who would see the benefits of those savings, and additionally how decreased costs of plan administration would affect workers saving for retirement?
Sure. As far as the impact on the costs, it would vary depending on how the plan expenses, but as often is the case, plan expenses are passed on to the participants. And to the extent that there are additional costs that is borne to actually have to search for participants that are lost, maintaining accounts for participants who are inactive, those costs would be passed along to all participants, including those that kept their balance in the plan. The cost of record keeping could be directly deducted from their account, so it would actually reduce the amount they have in retirement savings. And that impacts how retirement savings grow. So to the extent a participant is incurring higher fees related to their retirement plan assets, then they have less opportunity to grow those assets to have a secure retirement.
Thank you. Mr. Stevens, if you could be quick, I could get this one in. What risks and expenses are imposed on participants when a plan loses a tax-qualified status?
Very briefly, Mr. Chairman, you lose the tax-qualified status and you're a participant in that plan. If you have employer contributions that you're vested in that particular year that the plan loses its qualification, you have to include all of those in gross income and pay taxes on them.
Thank you. Wanted to get that in. I now recognize the ranking member of the full committee, Mr. Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, it seems to me that we're focused on those with accounts. Ms. Avery, can you tell me what portion of workers approach retirement age with adequate retirement funds?
Mr. Scott, the proportion of workers who don't even have access to a retirement plan at work is roughly 1/3 of our working families in the United States. And a significantly larger proportion approach retirement with inadequate resources. So I very much support your point that the broader issue here, the top priority perhaps, is to expand coverage and make the system that we have reason to be very proud of and that has delivered meaningful benefits for millions of middle-income families, to extend that system to the people who are left out.
Well, 1/3 have no access. Those with access, I understand a lot of them don't have much in their accounts.
Yes, sir, that's correct. And we have proposals to help people increase the amount that they save when they have access to plans through things like automatic enrollment in 401ks, which I was happy to have helped initiate 20 years ago, almost to this day, when I was at Treasury through rulings. But to your other point, sir, the 1/3 who are not eligible for a 401k or another employer plan can be automatically enrolled in much the same way that 401k eligible people can, but into IRAs, so that a small business that's not ready to sponsor a plan, though we should do our utmost to continue to encourage them to do so, but those small businesses, as Mr. Stevens points out, where coverage is lower, can have their employees enjoy the benefits of auto-enrollment into a tax-favored account that they own, the government can't take away from them, and that will promote an ownership society.
Now, I understand some states have required employers to do that if they don't have a pension plan, that the employee can request that actually take place. Is that right?
Yes, Mr. Scott. A number of states have adopted the automatic IRA proposal, which Mr. Neal, the ranker on Ways and Means, as you know, has been championing for years as automatic enrollment in IRAs in a way that would give small employers an opportunity to let their employees use the payroll system to save without having to sponsor a plan. Again, if we could get them to sponsor a plan, all the better, but the small employer gets a tax credit for automatically enrolling employees into an IRA that's managed by Mr. Stevens' members, or the insurance, or the brokerage, or the banking, or the credit union industries, private sector IRAs, that will help people acquire that saving that the rest of us have.
Now, one of the first things that happened in the 115th Congress is that we passed a Congressional Review Act which sabotaged the regulations that protected these plans. Can you tell me what happened after we did that?
Mr. Scott, what has happened are, I would say, two things. Number one, the states have continued to move forward because the regulations were not necessary to authorize those programs. They were encouraging, they were helpful. Number two, Congress has failed to enact a nationwide solution. The reasons that we have 6 states that have now adopted automatic IRAs, which would auto-enroll something like 12 million families who have no access to plans now. The reason the states have moved forward is that Congress has thus far not acted on Mr. Neal's proposal, which has in the past had robust bipartisan support from the Heritage Foundation when it was originally rolled out there, in the past from the national writers at the National Review, writers at the Washington Times, as well as the New York Times editorial page. Council of Economic Advisors chairman, former chairman under President Reagan and President Clinton have endorsed it. Empower, the second or third largest 401k record keeper, has endorsed it under their CEO, Bob Reynolds. ARP, many others. So there's been strong support for this simple idea. Nationwide, this would be much simpler than the state-by-state approach. It's understandable why states would try to pilot this idea. But if Congress were to act on this on a bipartisan basis, the state plans would be subsumed within it, and we would end up with a single way for 30 or 40 million of your constituents who don't have access to a 401k today to be saving the way the rest of us do.
Thank the gentleman. And I recognize the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Allen.
Sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for joining us for this hearing this morning. Mr. Stevens, along this same line of questioning, retirement plan administration can be burdensome and it can be expensive, especially for small employers that wish to offer retirement plans. Can you describe the administrative tasks that small employers maintaining their own plans must perform? And how does HR 854 or whatever we try to do here to make this available to the populace provide relief to small employers while still ensuring these important tasks are accomplished?
Thank you for your question, Congressman. I think you start with the proposition that running a small business involves a lot of red tape just generally. An employer who wants to adopt a 401k plan is signing up for a lot more of it. You've got to use service providers and others to document the plan, to prepare a summary plan description. You've got periodic notifications you need to give to your employees. You've got to file a highly detailed Form 5500 with the Department of Labor on an annual basis. You've got to arrange for financial audits. You've got to make sure that the trust is established, the investment options are there. So it's a lot of headaches, and it's no surprise, therefore, that many small businesses don't sign up for it.
Right.
What the open MEP bill would do is allow those employers to band together and to go to a professional services provider who will deal with all of those headaches, take them off of the employer, and in the process achieve a scale with respect to the plan that can make it possible for them to lower costs and improve quality and things of that nature. So,
what is prohibiting providers from doing that right now?
Well, one is a interpretation that the Labor Department has of the ERISA statute that requires there to be some nexus between the employer. The thought is that that provides more assurance that there's going to be someone looking out for the benefit of the plan participants. Another is the IRS one bad apple rule, which has fairly draconian penalties for all the employers if one employer doesn't do what's necessary to make sure that it's a tax-qualified plan. So I think the regulatory impediments are very clear, and if they can be moved aside, ERISA protections can still be there to protect the participants, and we can encourage many more smaller employers to adopt plans.
Yeah, I see lots of heads shaking this way up there, so obviously it seems to be unanimous and we need to move on that. Mr. Walsh, going back to this electronic delivery to default the pension plan disclosures, you know, we've already talked about that. I mean, what's the biggest objection to that? I mean, I know I get these large things in the mail, yeah, and frankly, I must confess I don't read them. And I mean, what can we do to get this ball moving?
Yeah, TIA is in full favor of electronic delivery. With this one caveat, right? I mean, and I have parents in the 80s, right? There's got to be that opt-out for consumer protection, right? Give people the opportunity to get the paper. The fact that there is a once-a-year mailing to remind folks on what's going on. A majority of participants overwhelmingly want electronic delivery, and it cut cost, right? And you said it. Cost equals reduced investment returns, reduced account balances. So full favor, but let's just make sure those folks who want paper can opt out and get paper.
Exactly. What we're talking about here is giving the participants choice.
Exactly.
Yeah, and that's important. As far as the getting back to the regulatory process and what we're dealing with here, and I'll just kind of just open this up for any of the others I haven't addressed. We only have 36 seconds, but any ideas on how we can overcome this, make this more available to folks? I know I tried to do it in my company, and we did it in our company. How can we do this and allow all these small businesses out here that hire 70% of all new employees, allow their employees to participate in plans like this? Ms. Diallo, you...
10 seconds.
Yeah.
Congressman, there have been suggestions about a simpler form of a 401k plan. I believe there have been proposals in the Senate to that effect. The ICI has supported that idea. So there are ways of facilitating this process even further. I think the open MEP idea is a good start, but there are additional steps to
So
come.
you're waiting on us, right?
Yeah,
Thank you very much. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. And now I'm pleased to recognize a lady who spent time actually doing this stuff and understands it well, gentlelady from Delaware, Ms. Blunt Rochester.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for yielding, and I want to thank you and Mr. Sablon for hosting this hearing on the various bipartisan retirement proposals that we're discussing today. I also want to thank the witnesses. This is a very, very important topic that we're discussing, and before I direct my questions, I want to update my colleagues on the committee that a revised version of H.R. 4604 is included in H.R. 5282, the Retirement Enhancement and Savings Act of 2018, RESA. Mr. Wahlberg's office and my office worked with AARP on the revised language. And now I'll turn to my questions. My first question is
Just took one word, didn't it?
That's all.
That's pretty cool, yeah.
It was that simple, if everything could be that simple. Mr. Walsh, could I ask you to talk a little bit about the fact that it's my understanding the Department of Labor has taken some action to try to deal with the barriers that employers face in offering annuities to their employees. Can you discuss why you believe a legislative fix is still needed?
Yes, thank you for the question. So Mark, Mr. Every, I think you hit the nail on the head. Mr. Every used the word simplification, right? So again, what this does is it basically updates the law, makes it simple. Look, most plan sponsors, most consultants, they're looking for some help on how they really look at the financial strength of an insurance company. So why not rely on those folks who do it every day, the state regulators? And they actually have 2 lines of governance that the state regulators put in place. So this just makes it much simpler for a plan sponsor to leverage annuities. Now, again, they're not relieved of their duty to make sure that they follow a prudent process to pick a good product, right? You still want to review the features, the cost, the payouts. This just makes it much simpler. Rely on the state regulators, and then go do your due diligence about what a good product for your plan is.
Mr. Every, we had an opportunity to talk a little bit before, and you mentioned that this was a long time coming. Would you like to also piggyback on Mr. Walsh's comments?
I would. I think that the prospect of having more lifetime income in our retirement system and helping people with retirement income decisions is very heartening. I would point out that lifetime income is not only commercial annuities, which we've been talking about in particular, but also the kinds of products that Paul Stevens' members offer, or Ms. DeLoya's firm, managed payouts, systematic withdrawals, different ways of helping people get a predictable, steady income flow and figure out how quickly they can draw down their assets in retirement without an undue risk of running out of their savings, nor the opposite risk of hoarding their savings because they're so afraid of running out.
Mr. Walsh, TIAA works with a number of institutions of higher education in the 403B marketplace, who I understand almost universally have access to annuities in their plan. Do retirement savers in those plans actually invest in the annuities? And what is the difference between that population and the broader population?
So take a step back. So remember, fundamentally, 403B was designed with very different intent than 401K. 403B, since its existence, and started with higher ed, they looked at these plans to be the core plan, a pension-type plan, and hence why you had annuities. So our plan sponsors have always had annuities, and they're very comfortable with annuities. Whereas the 401K space, obviously, 401K plans were designed as supplemental to DB plans. So it takes some education to kind of understand how these products work. But again, this is really a terrific opportunity to take the best of 403B and the best of 401K and combine it into one plan that works both during accumulation and then payout.
I'm going to close with this. I really appreciate the fact that we're doing something on a bipartisan manner, and I think it's for the group. We hear that baby boomers are retiring every second. And the fact that some say a third, some say a half, that people aren't prepared or ready. This, to me, is a service that we can do for the American people. I thank you, and I yield back.
I thank you, gentlelady, and I recognize the gentleman from Tennessee, Mr. Rowe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And just to start out by saying, 40 years ago, we had a small business with 12 employees that we started. We now have 450 employees in our business, and we've provided pension benefits. It's why I don't need this job today, because of being able to invest in my retirement. And 35% of people over 55 in this country have zero retirement savings. Anything we can do to encourage people to save for retirement, we should be doing at light speed. It's a question I have. I'm the lead co-sponsor, and I want to thank Mr. Polis of the Retire Act. The bill allows electronic delivery. We know about that as a default method for savers to receive information about their plans. And I have a number of letters, Mr. Chairman, in the savings industry supporting this common sense bill, and I ask unanimous consent they be entered into the record.
Without objection and hearing none, they'll be entered.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As Mr. Allen was saying, I have a fire pit at my house. And I went out one night with my trusty Sheltie dog, built a nice fire, and spent 2 hours burning all this paper I get sent to me from the industry, of which I didn't read. And so I have now, with my advisor, I now get an electronic delivery, and thank goodness, one of the best things I ever did. So I think having the opt-out, as Mr. Walsh, I think that's very important for people who do want to get this pile of paper sent to their homes. I do not. And so I think this is a terrific way. And it would, how much do you think it would save? And I think one of the things you all said made perfect sense. Anything that's not spent can go into investment in increasing your yield and return. Anyone like to comment on that?
I think the costs are considerable about what can be saved, as far as Fidelity has consistently worked the last number of years with our plan sponsors to increase electronic delivery. One of the most common complaints we get along the lines of what you described from participants is, why do I have to receive these things in paper, and how can they get them electronically? I think it's also important to remember that there's a lot of required disclosures that under ERISA in the code. Some of them you might want in paper. Others you may not. Certainly, again, another common complaint we get is, why am I receiving another prospectus? And they pile them up, and they do something along the lines of what you describe, as far as either burn them in a pit or just put them in the recycle bin.
Yeah, I burned up a recycle machine getting rid of it. I also, Mr. Chairman, have a testimony of TAG Resources, a business in Knoxville, Tennessee, that's an aggregator of plan services for individual plans as well as the closed MIPS, not to be confused with multi-employer pension plans or Medicare that we're working on, for employers who would otherwise benefit from changes which would permit open MIPS. I request unanimous consent that testimony be entered into the record.
Without objection and hearing none, it'll be entered.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I, along with Representative Linda Sanchez, have introduced legislation H.R. 1688 to allow employers and sole proprietors participating in retirement plans to administered in the same way to file a single aggregated Form 5500. Do you agree that my legislation would get rid of unnecessary paperwork and simplify the filing process for employers looking to sponsor retirement savings plans? Mr. Stevens, take that.
I'm not familiar with it firsthand, Congressman, as you describe it, it seems to me it's very much in keeping with the principles of the open MEPs, trying to consolidate these tasks as much as possible.
And reduce the just enormous cost for a small business. I know when we first started ours, the costs were much greater. As we got bigger and bigger and bigger, the administrative burden goes way down. And as you accumulate more funds, the amount of money that you can earn, the fee that you pay goes way down. So I think it makes absolute sense to be able to aggregate those.
We all know that forms like that only get more lengthy and detailed as time goes by.
Yes, and I'm not sure what value they bring. Obviously, you want to protect. I do understand that. There are still unscrupulous people out there, and I totally understand that. But I think we've swung the pendulum a little bit too far in that direction. I also am working on, and I'll just throw this out in my last 20 seconds, and it's not a new idea, but it's to start savings at birth. We deliver about 4 million, I know something about that, that's what I did for a living, so we deliver about 4 million babies a year in this country. And I'd like to start saving at birth, because if you do that and let that money accumulate over 65, 70 years, whatever the number is, and you use it for your savings, you can guarantee a comfortable life for someone that millions of Americans don't have now. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. I recognize my friend from Connecticut, Mr. Courtney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I just want to congratulate you and Congressman Sablon and Congresswoman Blunt Rochester for the great work that we're talking about here today. It's refreshing, actually, to see the bipartisan positive change that we're trying to accomplish here. And but I would like to go back to the electronic distribution measure, which again, the benefits are pretty obvious. I don't use a fire pit, we recycle, but I think I'd have the fire marshal out at the house actually if we were doing that. But you know, I think, you know, intuitively we all understand, you know, the value of that. But Mr. Avery, again, you sort of did raise a slight, I wouldn't call it red flag, but maybe a yellow flag that, you know, we maybe still need to polish up the consumer protections on this issue. I was just wondering if maybe you could kind of talk a little bit more about what you see more than an opt-out, you know, to make sure that people, again, are going to still have their rights protected.
Thank you for the question, Mr. Courtney. I think you've put your finger on it. It's not yet sufficiently clear, I think, whether people would be protected by an opt-out. The question is exactly how would the choice work? The prior question might be, why not give people a choice that's not favoring electronic or paper, that just asks each person to indicate what they would do? Obviously, there has to be some ultimate default for those who wouldn't respond. I'm not sure we've met the burden of proof yet that it should be the default, even the ultimate default, if you ask everyone to affirmatively elect whether they want paper or electronic or both being, as Ms. DeLoya mentioned, perhaps the ideal. Some people might just want a one-page statement every year on hard copy of their benefits. A statement not just that they have the right to opt into paper, but if you're going to send them a notice saying they've got the right to opt into paper, why not put on the notice, here's your current benefits, the way the federal thrift savings plan does now. I get a paper statement from them every year saying, here's your benefits, and then you have choices as to whether you want all that other paper in electronic form that you might equally not read, or in paper form. The ARP has done a study that suggests, that reports, based on a survey, that most of the people who responded prefer paper. They actually had a 75% response that individuals prefer paper. Now, we've got other studies that suggest that people prefer electronic, and clearly many people prefer one or the other, or so many prefer both. Paper for certain things, not for the voluminous documents that you're not going to read, Dr. Rowe, as you said, but electronic, and so electronic for those things, but maybe a hard copy for a few critical items. I think that we have a great opportunity here with further work and dialogue among the members of the subcommittee and the committee, other members of Congress, the executive branch, Treasury and Labor, participant representatives and stakeholder representatives, including the industry folks here. I believe we can make the necessary progress, and this is an exciting prospect, to reach a reasonable, appropriate bipartisan resolution of the outstanding questions about what consumer protections we need and whether a default into electronic is a realistic way to protect busy people who are often confused and often have passwords, usernames, security questions, on and on, that get between them and the actual ability to opt out or to make some other decision.
Well, thank you for that answer. And again, I do think we can find the sweet spot here. I mean, it's just a question of thinking through some of these issues. As you point out, the plethora of passwords, we all have to try and remember which one's which. In terms of newspapers we read online to our pension benefits, that can be kind of a headache in and of itself. So anyway, I think we've got the will is here. I think for us to keep an open mind to coming up with more ideas.
And if I may, Congressman, I would also suggest that the committee look carefully at how the cost savings from more electronic, and I think more electronic is good, and it's great that there's a consensus on that. But as you work further to figure out exactly where, as you say, the sweet spot is, to reconcile protection of individuals who prefer paper and the advantages of electronic communications as well as paper communications, that you determine how the cost savings would be allocated. I think my fellow panelists are absolutely right that there could be considerable cost savings. Some of that, though, should not be at the expense of people who prefer paper and at the expense of participants' right to choose which medium they get the communications in. So what would guarantee that those savings would actually return to the people who are the center of our whole system, the participants themselves?
Thank you. I recognize the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Norcross.
Thank you, Chairman, and to the ranking members, and certainly to the investment community, along with the employers and the employees, to put together a system for those golden years. It's called retirement. I have a little bit of each. I have a defined benefit, I have a defined contribution, I have an IRA, I have a 403B, I have a 401K, I have a penny jar, and I have a mattress. We got it all covered.
We stay close to you. We're taking care of that.
I didn't say how much we had in it, but we have it. And that's what's so important to realize is that those golden years, it's deferred wages, however they're brought into a system. I'm going to go and ask something just a little bit different. When we start talking about what a person needs in order to retire with dignity, the actuaries do these numbers quite often. A person who's starting out today, age 25 years old, let's pick a number, 40,000. I don't think most people realize how early and how much they have to put away in order to even come close to making it. Now, this is a jump ball. Does anybody have an idea? Is it $100 a week? Is it $1,000 a week? Because these are about choices that you have to make when you're trying to put food on the table, you're trying to send your kids to school, and the last one that usually makes it, unfortunately, is retirement.
I'll take a shot at that, Mr. Norcross, and then obviously invite my colleagues to jump in. I think the data would suggest that somewhere in the neighborhood between 12 and 15%, if you save between 12 and 15% of your compensation, you have a pretty decent probability of maybe getting to 80% racial replacement. Now, not everybody's the same, right? And every situation is slightly different. But again, the rough math would suggest 12 to 15%, maybe a little bit more, depending on your salary, would get you there in combination with Social Security.
Starting at what point in your life?
25 years old.
Okay, that's
22 years old. Yeah, and then, and that's critical, right? As much as we talk about investment products, we talk about mutual funds, we talk about target date funds, we talk about annuities. Savings is the number one factor, right? You've got to get people to save. So that's why things like auto enrollment, auto escalation are critically important.
I would add that at Fidelity, one of the things that we try to do is have tools out there that actually break it down so it's not overwhelming to say, well, how much do I need for a 24-year-old? 50 years from now when I'm going to finally retire. Rather look at, on a sliding scale. So maybe I haven't started to work until after my kids are in school, so I'm 35, so I don't have the benefit of starting early. How much will I need to increase my contributions so I can have a retirement income with dignity? So to be able to break it down into more meaningful chunks for them to be able to take action related to what they can do at that time.
Congressman, the way we think about it at ICI is there's a cycle that you go through in your life in terms of savings, and I think this is just intuitive. As a young person, you may be just married, you want to buy a home, you have kids, you need to educate them. People begin to get really serious about retirement savings sometime in their 40s because they have other priorities for their savings and their investments and spending earlier than that. But we kind of recognize that in our system with catch-up contributions and things of that nature. But yeah, I just recently was invited to give a speech at something called the Tiburon CEO Summit. It's investment figures. And my subject was, is America facing a retirement crisis? In our judgment, there are challenges, but it's not a crisis. And so let me give you 2 data points. If you look at near-retiree households in the United States, over 80% of them have assembled some kind of retirement assets in a DB plan, a DC plan, or an IRA. 94% of them will get Social Security benefits. And with the progressive Social Security formula we have, for the bottom 2 quintiles of earners in terms of average lifetime earnings, Social Security provides more or less a full pension. And by that I mean replaces the earnings that they were receiving during their working life. So I think this is a system that's working far better than often we realize, and I'd be happy to share my remarks at that summit with the subcommittee because I think it does provide an important perspective on the critical issue you raise.
No, it's so important. By the way, the multi-employer plan isn't doing real well. We're 4 of us from this committee sit on that, and we have our work cut out for us. But those are just the challenges. We have 4 great bills I'm in support of coming together, working. This is how Congress should work, because at the end of the day, we do need a retirement plan that works for everybody.
And Congressman, if I may add, I think my fellow panelists have spoken very well to this point, but while the glass is largely full, the glass is also largely empty. You mentioned defined benefit plans. We shouldn't omit them from the calculus here, whether they're multi-employer covering 10 million people or single employer covering 30 million people. They're a critical element, and they're still here and provide lifetime income. I would say that in order to achieve the results you're talking about, for people to save enough, we do need to start by auto-enrolling the 1/3 of our population who are not saving in any employer plan now.
Thank you.
Thank you. You're back.
I recognize now the gentleman from New York, Mr. Espaillat.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I agree that these bills being examined are so important and should be marked up by this committee without delay. I also applaud my Democratic colleagues, Ranking Member Sablan, Congresswoman Blunt-Rochester, and Congressman Polis for their leadership, as well as the other side of the aisle for this important bipartisan work that must continue. It seems we should continue this bipartisan momentum present at today's hearing and do really more to increase workers' access to retirement savings plans. Tens of millions of workers, including many in my district, don't have access to a plan. And so even those workers who do have access to one may not be able to stretch their paycheck far enough to contribute to it. And as we all know, workers across the board are not saving enough for retirement. According to the Economic Policy Institute, half of working-age families have nothing saved in retirement accounts, half of working-age families. And so my question is to Mr. Ivory, what are some of the higher, longer-term, big-ticket policy items, aside from the ones being examined here today, on which Congress should work together and pass? In other words, where can we make the biggest difference for the most people when it comes to retirement security? That's my first question. What are those big ticket ticket policy ideas that we should be working on, beyond what we're doing here today, to ensure that more people are sort of like dragged into this. So.
Thank you for the question, Mr. Espaillat. I think that if we really want to move the needle, that we have to grab the bull by the horns and follow Ranking Member Neal's lead on this, automatically enroll people in IRAs in a way that will take the initiative from the state level up to the federal level and have a uniform national system. The states have been pointing the way. Ms. Bonamici, your state of Oregon, is already implementing auto-enrollment of people into IRAs. The federal government can provide a tax credit to these employers that would participate in auto-enrolling, would be called upon to auto-enroll their people, but with no real trouble to the employer. The payroll service providers would do the work, the private sector, IRA, financial institutions that are trustees or custodians of IRAs, many of whom are sitting at this panel, are represented here. They would get the assets under management. This would be a private sector-oriented solution, but we would give that third of the American population, something like 55 million working families, the ability to save easily at work, conveniently, without requiring the employer to sponsor a plan or to make a penny worth of contributions. If the employer didn't want to, we'd still encourage them to sponsor. We have things like the Simple IRA, which I developed years ago and now has 3 or 4 million accounts that small businesses can adopt without most of the costs or hoops that Paul Stevens referred to with the 401k. The 401k itself is getting much cheaper, I think much simpler than it used to be, and most small businesses outsource all the work to a financial institution that will often do it for no fee other than a portion of the earnings on the investments. So I think the auto IRA bill should get a bipartisan support, that this is the time to do it. And if Congress does it now, the state programs, which are almost identical, the 6 programs that use auto IRA today, small differences, they will fall into line and be subsumed in a single federal system.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
I thank the gentleman, and I recognize the gentlelady, the patient gentlelady from Oregon, Ms. Bonamici.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and ranking members. Thank you to our witnesses as well. This is such an important issue to talk about retirement security. I want to reiterate what I know is in the written testimony about the importance of Social Security and preserving Social Security, which is really a foundation on which to add. We know that working families across Oregon and across the country should be able to retire with security and dignity. And unfortunately, that's not a reality for too many families that lack access to a retirement savings plan through their employer. They may be struggling already to make ends meet. According to the Department of Labor, nearly 40 million private sector workers do not have access to retirement savings plan through their employer. This is a good bipartisan hearing today. I'm glad we're talking about this issue, and I'm pleased that we're having this conversation about how we strengthen the ability of workers to save. I wanted to weigh in briefly on the electronic delivery issue. We've had some good conversations here already today. As someone with a consumer protection background and as someone who spends a significant amount of time with my 89-year-old mother who doesn't do electronic anything, we need to make sure that we are having options. I'm a little concerned about having electronic be the default, but certainly having it as an option for people who choose is important. So there's a lot of potential, and I know the savings could be used for beneficial purposes, but let's make sure that we get the balance right and the privacy issues are addressed. And thank you, Mr. Avery, for mentioning my home state of Oregon. We've been a national leader in helping workers save for retirement. We offer a high-quality savings plan to every Oregonian who doesn't have access through their employer. This reduces the burden on small businesses that want to give their employees options to save for retirement. It creates opportunities for workers who don't have a plan because of where they work. As of May 9th, 834 employers have registered, and 35,313 of their eligible employees have enrolled. Participating employees have already saved more than $2.9 million, and this is a fairly new program that's in effect. That's just in a few months. So I've introduced the Preserve Rights of States and Political Subdivisions to Encourage Retirement Savings, or PROSPERS Act, to support states like Oregon that have created innovative programs to help workers save for retirement and carry their savings from job to job. It would allow states and cities who sponsor their own retirement plans for residents who work in the private sector but are not offered any retirement plan for their employer. So I hope this subcommittee and this Congress can get that enacted. Dr. Avery, a successful way to get people to save for retirement is for workers to be enrolled in a workplace retirement plan that makes automatic deductions. How can we further reduce the barriers for workers to enroll in retirement savings plan in our evolving 21st century economy? What are some other ways we can break down those barriers?
Ms. Bonamici, thank you for the question. I think that the most important thing we can do is to have people auto-enrolled with the option of opting out into plans. And if they don't have access to a plan, we can simulate to some degree the 401k experience that most of us are fortunate enough to have in one form or another through IRAs. We're taking the building blocks of our current system, which has accomplished so much and helps so many middle-class families, and using what we know works. We know the payroll system works to help us save. We know automatic enrollment works, and we know tax-favored accounts work. And there's a tremendous bipartisan consensus around all of those things: the importance of the employer system, the success and effectiveness of auto-enrollment, and the value of saving in individual accounts, in addition to defined benefit, et cetera, and of course, the bedrock Social Security. So I think if we do that on a nationwide basis, your state is illustrating that that can work and will work.
And work well.
It's a pilot project.
I want to get one more question in.
Yes.
I've been working with my colleague from Indiana, Representative Messer, to introduce the Retirement Savings Lost and Found Act. We know that this generation, the new generation of workers are moving around from job to job. Our bill would use data that employers are already required to report to the Treasury Department to create a national online lost and found for retirement accounts. The bill would also make it easier for the sponsors to move small accounts, which are often lost or neglected, into age-appropriate target date funds so workers can maximize their returns. We know these small accounts are oftentimes the only savings workers have. We need to make it easier for them to track those savings. These are consumer protections that go hand in hand with the reforms in the Retirement Plan Modernization Act. So I wanted to call that to the subcommittee's attention. Can you discuss other ways that Congress can help workers preserve retirement benefits in plans and discourage pre-retirement cash outs and consumption? And I'm afraid I'm out of time, so I'll ask for that to be submitted, response to be submitted in writing. Thank you, and I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the gentlelady. And now I recognize for closing comments, Ms. Blunt-Rochester. Oh, I see the ranking member is back. You can. I go back to my original statement, Ms. Blunt-Rochester.
Well, thank you, Mr. Wahlberg, Chairman Wahlberg, and also Mr. Sablon. I want to thank the witnesses for an interesting and constructive discussion of these 4 bills, and we appreciate your expertise and your experience that you all bring to this issue. I'm grateful that you made time out of your busy schedules to join us. And I also want to thank the members of the subcommittee for their thoughtful participation. I think it's clear that there is a bipartisan commitment to improving and modernizing our retirement savings system. The 4 bills that were examined at today's hearing are important and should be marked up by the full committee without delay. But we shouldn't stop there. We should continue working together to protect and strengthen retirement security for all Americans. Right now, too many Americans lack access to a retirement savings plan through their employer, and too few are saving enough of their own to enjoy a stable and dignified retirement. Congress must work together to responsibly address our retirement security crisis, and I believe that we can and should do in the same respectful and bipartisan manner that occurred at today's hearing. I want to thank Chairman Walberg for convening this hearing, and I look forward to continuing to work with him, Mr. Sablon, and the rest of my subcommittee colleagues on this important issue. I yield back.
I thank the gentlelady, and I'm tempted to follow the pattern of our witnesses and say yes, yes, yes. But let me just add a little bit. I think this is a topic that we certainly can find bipartisan solutions in because it impacts all of us. And hopefully, sitting on this committee and this subcommittee, we have already identified that this is an important issue to encourage. All I can say is, as I watched my father toward the ending years of his work as a machinist tool die maker, using some of the instruments that are represented at this table today. In fact, toward the closing of his career, yet becoming very, very intent upon working primarily to make sure that there was a retirement plan in place that he could use to some degree, but primarily for my mother, made it very, very easy for my brother and myself to complete our commitment to our father and making sure that Mom was cared for. But he had done the heavy lifting, using instruments that I guess I've come to describe as kind of like potato chips. Once you start eating them, it's hard to stop because it is simple. And if we work together to provide common sense, up-to-date policies that make it even simpler for people to do what they ought to do for themselves, and to encourage businesses as they can and are willing to do what they can for the employees, we'll all be better because of it. And then we can fight on all the other things. But on these things that really make sense for the long term, we can work together to accomplish. So I say thank you to our subcommittee, to my colleagues on both sides of the aisle, and especially those that have worked together to find solutions in legislative form. This has to move forward, and I think it has a good chance of doing that very thing. Having no more business to come before the subcommittee at this time, we will adjourn.